All right. Yes, you're here. The hidden power of mobile first design. So this session, just like every one of mine, the title's deceiving. I'm just going to try to bake in some basic UX principles and accessibility principles through the lens of mobile first design. So like Joe said, my name is Trevor Calabro. I am the senior user experience strategist here at Atten. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of the return visitors of these webinars that sometimes my webinars are a little content dense. So this one is really focused on just one thing. And I want to really kind of give you some real hacks. So this is like a UX hack, a UX fast track, something that you can use today that'll really kind of get you moving forward. So I have the luxury when consulting with our clients to sit and we do what I call a teach a person to fish model. So we get to walk through all these principles and we dive deep into it. And it's a really great experience all around. But a lot of the feedback I got was like, but Trevor, I don't have time like that with my internally, with my stakeholders, with my clients. So is there any way we can kind of like summarize some of this stuff? And that's how we bore this talk. So today I want to really talk to you about what is mobile first design and also equally important what it's not, why it's an extremely powerful approach that you can use starting today to like really convince stakeholders that user-centered design is the way to go without having to like bear the burden of teaching them, the teach a person to fish model. And then lastly, I want to show some real world ways to leverage this approach in your own work. I always try to make this stuff actionable. And this one is the most actionable of all, so I'm pretty excited to talk with you about it. So let's get started. What is mobile first design? So it's in the name, right? I mean, everyone kind of gets it. I think most people know this. In the chat, why don't we, some people take a stab at defining this, say if you're familiar with the concept, but it is really self-explanatory. It's an approach to web design where designers, it's got the word design and mobile in it a million times, right? So web design where designers start their design process on the phone first. So this means you make sure everything works on the phone before you even consider what it looks like on larger viewports. Now, the history of this is, by the time the first smartphone was built, the first mobile first approach was being kind of done in the world in the tech space. But Google really popularized mobile first design in 2010. This is when they really indexed, they really kind of optimized all of their apps for the mobile environment. And because of that, they popularized it. And in today's world, mobile first design is a best practice done by almost all major tech companies. And I want to explain to you a little bit of why, but more so the power behind it. Here's what it's not. So I'm not going to be talking to you about breakpoints today. If you anticipated me talking to you about breakpoints, then I just want to say shame, ding, shame, ding. This is a dated reference already from Game of Thrones, ding, right? Content should no longer be measured in pixels. I want you to internalize this idea. If you're still thinking about the web in pixels, I hope to challenge that idea today. I hope to change your mind. The web is now responsive. So no one can predict the size of the new devices coming out, right? Like there's flip phones are back. That's a thing. There's phones that open up like a purse. I don't even know what's going on. Watches. Pretty soon they're going to do a chip. I think if Elon Musk has his way, we'll have chips in our brain, right? So how do we know what the interface is going to look like? So we could play this endless game of figuring out breakpoints, or we can do this approach. What I want to do is I want to empower us as web creators to no longer be limited by the hardware of that our content's being displayed on, right? The hardware is the limiting factor. Instead, I want to foster the creation of strategically sound content that works on all viewports. A little fun fact, the woman that plays the Shame Lady in Game of Thrones is also the actress that plays the executive in Ted Lasso. So real quick about Ted Lasso, if you haven't seen this show, it's an Apple TV show. It's about this man played by Jason Sudeikis, this character called Ted Lasso, of course. And he is he's a head coach of a second-rate Division II American football team that gets recruited to go to England and coach one of the biggest Premier League soccer teams on earth. And the idea here is he knows nothing about soccer whatsoever, but he has a deep level of emotional intelligence. He's extremely self-aware, and he knows literally nothing about soccer, but his teams are successful because those things are compounding factors. So he doesn't know anything about soccer, yet he's successful. There's a parallel here between the mobile first approach. Yeah, see, can you see the resemblance when I put them side by side? So moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Ted Lasso effect as we go forward. I've just coined this phrase. And if you're not watching Ted Lasso, then shame, ding, shame. It's a great show. I highly recommend it. So just like Ted Lasso, the mobile first design approach gives you so much more than just a start to your design process, right? Just like he gives so much more than knowledge of soccer. It's a little trick that helps you fast track your design process. And that's what I want to talk with you today. So this presentation are for people who make websites that hate going back and reworking designs because like basic requirements were missed up front. Raise your hand if that's any of you out there. This presentation is for people who hate writing two completely different sets of code for the exact same UI elements. Anyone? Right? It's for people who hate paying designers and developers to make two versions of everything. This is the whole breakpoint model is broken in and of itself. Okay, so this presentation, most importantly, is for people who care that their users can find the information that they need no matter how they access your website's content, right? So my big hope is by the end of this presentation, you never start a design from the desktop view again. We'll see if I can convince you. So the way to do this is to start thinking about the viewports and who is viewing them. So let's pop up our first poll. Let's try to see where the baseline knowledge is here. So according to a recent Pew Research study, what percentage of Americans own smartphones? 51%, 61%, 71%, 81%, or 91%? Whoever's monitoring the polls, tell me when it's up. I guess you can just shoot up the answers. Ooh, we've got a variety here. I like if you see it gets more and more. So people think more and more people. Pretty close, pretty close. It's actually 81% of Americans own smartphones today. So for those of you that said that, but here's even more important. So this, when you Google mobile first design and why it's so good, this is what you find. I want to give you more than that. You will not find this content anywhere else on the internet. Trust me, I tried. This is why we made this presentation. This is even more important, is that 90% are using more than one device per task. 90% of all users. By the way, that was done by Google. So we're talking about Google users, which is a vast majority of the people on the internet. So if you use Google, they put you in this study. It was a macro study. So what does that mean? That means people are no longer just, a lot of people I talk to say, well, I want to optimize one of these workflows because we believe, or our analytics shows, this trend is changing. Think about yourself. How many of us do a single task? I'm going between my phone, my desktop, my laptop, all the different kinds of stuff. I have a Surface, believe it or not. I toggle between all these things, and sometimes it's across tasks, particularly Amazon. I think I've used Amazon on every single device known to man. So ask yourself, if this is true for you, is it also true for your users? And here's a little more research. So you'll be able to find all that stuff. Here's the stuff that is never talked about, is when you design for the extremes, it improves the experience for everyone. So I blame Silicon Valley, right? Silicon Valley does not believe in this. Silicon Valley has popularized the idea of minimal viable product. And the way MVPs, minimal viable products, are designed on the web is you optimize for that right down the middle kind of person. If you can get to 80% of the market, this is the speak from Silicon Valley, and your product appeases that, then you're good to go. Pretty much like, who cares about the people on the edges here? Well, there's been more and more usability research done on this, and that notion has been flipped on its head. In fact, they have found that when you design for the extremes, like in this case, it works better for everyone. So you actually appease that 80% better when you accommodate the extremes. So just think about this. So making your designs on small screens, that's an extreme, right? This is where this presentation comes from. So when you make your content work on small screens, it pushes all your designs to be more readable, therefore more accessible, therefore people who are hard of seeing. Pretty soon, it just makes the world better altogether. So I want you to flip your idea about this and think about appeasing the extremes, and that gets us into our main meat and potatoes of this presentation. So the fast track part I'm talking about is this baked in best practices. So we have best practices just inherently baked into the idea that you design for your phone first. And I want to break them down into three main components. There's content development, there's information architecture, and then there's like choosing the proper user interface controls. Now, these three things are the biggest thing I deal with in my day-to-day job. And it just kind of occurred to me when putting this together, like, you know what, if you were to design everything to work on a phone, you get all these things kind of out of the box for free without having to, go and get a master's degree in user experience. There's no need if you can kind of just follow these principles. So let's dive into each one of these. Let's talk about content development. So again, I break everything down, right? So here's the 3 content creation tips for content development. And I'll explain a little bit as we go why mobile first makes this better and easier. So you want to cut until you can't cut anymore. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's look at this example. This is a real bit of copy written by a real company. And it's a lot of words for what it says. Now, just trust me on this. You don't need to read it all, but you look at that first line, major updates for release 1.5 include, right? So already it's kind of getting verbose. So let's take a rewrite here and try to cut some of these words. So after the first cut, maybe you come up with something like this. I'll talk a little bit later on why I think that's a really good headline or title for this area. And you can see there were three major ideas in that big paragraph. And those ideas were just broken out into sentences. So this is much better, right? We went from 70 some words to 48 words, but I think we can do even better. So let's cut and cut again. So let's cut even more. Here's what we got. I encourage you to put things in bulleted lists if possible. We'll talk a little bit more about why this is so effective, but also look here, there's no longer full sentences. These are just ideas. This is the big overarching kind of idea around this section. People are not reading your website like a book. It's just not. Many people create the content like that, but that's not how your users are engaging with it. They don't sit back, they don't look at it. What they do is they're trying to execute a task. And to help people execute a task, it's really nice to have information in digestible chunks like this. So it doesn't need to be a full sentence. You're not getting graded by your sixth grade English teacher here. 28 words, what an improvement, right? And then the idea here is you just keep cutting. So I would recommend doing one more round of cutting. And the idea is you cut again until it just doesn't make sense. This is a nice rule of thumb. And then once you get to that point, you just revert back to the last cut that made sense. And if you just keep cutting and cutting again, I guarantee you that your content will be much more well received by users. Let's think about this. This is what they look like side by side. This tells the essence of the information. Now, why is this important? I really want you to think about this. When you think about this mobile first design approach, and you're having this conversation with decision makers, most of the time some decision maker has had a hand in writing this content, or they're at least very invested in this kind of content. So you're having this conversation with them. And how much more simple is that conversation if you just display it like this, right? When you display it like this, I could see someone arguing for the quality of this paragraph. Each word has been meticulously chosen, and it's as accurate as possible. But as we know, it doesn't matter how accurate it is if people don't read it or if they don't get the main takeaways. So something like this, it does all the work for you. This is what I mean by fast tracking. Instead of sitting there and trying to convince your stakeholders of all the research around how users consume content, you can just show them 2 versions like this, right? I mean, ask yourself, like, how would this have gone in your past? Have you ever had anything happen like this with a stakeholder? Do you think something like this would have convinced them quicker, or at least like made the argument for you about like the exact verbiage is less important at this point, right? It's just really easy to see that one is superior to the other. I'm eliciting everyone to kind of talk in the chat. I hope everyone's kind of engaging there. All right, so that's cut until you can't cut anymore. The next one is, I want you to write like you're having a conversation. So I want you to be using pronouns, active voice, strong verbs. Let's take a look at some examples here. So let's look at this original sentence. Retention of their data for a period of 7 years is a requirement for all researchers. How many of us have seen or actually written content like this? I know I have, before I kind of understood this. What I mean by conversational is, this isn't really how people talk. Kind of flip your thought on this. What if your website was a person and that person's job is to communicate with your users? That's how I want you to think of this. I don't think you would actually say this. Would your website say something like this if it was a person? No, we've got unnecessary words. You've got all these like past tense kind of things in here. So what if there was something like this first revision? All researchers are required to retain their data for 7 years. Already a much better, a bigger improvement, right? The idea here is we're starting to front load some of the important information, but I still want to, the reason are required is bolded here is because that's still past tense. So we could do even better. So I put these in a logical order. So cut and cut more, and then revise and revise more. So what if something we took this and we revised it even further and wrote something like this? You must keep your data for 7 years. Now, simplicity is so complicated, but look at how much better that sentence is. I hope you guys can just see it just by looking here. Like, all researchers is unnecessary because it's implied that if you put the information on your website in the right place just in time, that the people reading this, if they're not researchers, they're not going to read it. If they are, they are. And if they're not, that's fine. You don't, like I said, you don't need to push your content on people that don't want or don't need it, but you want to make it easily accessible for the people that do need it. And here's that final cut. I mean, it's just like night and day to this sentence, right? So again, go through this with a friend. That's my recommendation here. So I give a rule of thumb at the end of each one. The rule of thumb is there. If you don't have a friend, then do what I call the WORM method. It's an acronym, WYRM. What do you really mean? So you just write it out, how you really mean it, and then you start to just write it out the most like verbose way possible, and then start from there. But say it like you would actually write it like you would actually say it out loud, like a conversation. All right. So we cut until we can't cut anymore. We write like we're having a conversation. And then the last tip here is write index card size chunks of content. So we want to keep your content concise and to the point, right? That's what all this is about. And a nice little trick is to think in your brain, how much stuff could fit on an index card, and make sure each group of content isn't bigger than that. So why is this true? Because we have to assume people are scanning and stopping, as opposed to that lean back, right? So I hope most of you are familiar with the F-shaped pattern. I'll go over it really quickly, but this is, users often read web pages like this, like a letter F. And there's all kinds of patterns. There's the layer cake, the zigzag, the lawnmower, but they all kind of say the basic thing. Most people are not reading your content like a book. They're scanning over it. So here's an eye tracking heat map where the user started something at number 1, caught their eye. So they scanned across until number 2. No, that's not it. They went down to number 3, something caught their eye, they scanned, and they rinse and repeat this over time. If you keep this idea in your head, it'll really help you to form these chunks properly. Front loading your chunks and getting really good explicit headers. So you want to be answering site visitors' questions, right? If we're having a conversation, you want to kind of anticipate that. So predict what users will be asking you at the time they're reading that chunk of content, and make sure those questions are answered, but not in a separate FAQ page, right? So as opposed to this FAQ page notion, a quick note on FAQ pages are kind of a red flag that your content is not conversational. So I'm always surprised how content creators have no trouble whatsoever writing in this conversational style that I talk about when it comes to writing content for the FAQ pages. But many people struggle. I know I did when I first started. They struggle when it's actual content on page. So this is more of a mindset adjustment, right? I believe all of us know how to write in this conversational manner. We just have been trained to write in other ways. Like that first paragraph I said that was like extremely accurate and it had all the right words, right? But that's not user-centered, right? So if you find yourself writing FAQ type content in an FAQ page, consider taking that out and putting it just in time, right on the actual content where you believe that question will be asked. So we want to put key chunks first. So people read your content like a funnel, meaning, you want them to, I always like to say it like this. If they read the first thing and they get what they need, high five, you did your job. That's fine. It doesn't matter that they didn't read the second thing. If they didn't get what they need and they read the second thing, high five, right? It's really bad if 90% of the people need to read all the way to the bottom to then get what they need. So think of it in those contexts. And then you want to break everything up with meaningful headers. So now that you have good content chunks that you could fit on an index card, you want to label them explicitly and relevantly. Let's look at an example here. This is actual text from a real study that was done. I just put it in Google Slides here. So all they did differently in this test was they took that bit of information and they added these conversational style headers. Note that first one, right? Do you need to find an apartment? That's the kind of conversational approach that's very, very helpful. So let's pop up another poll, see if you guys know anything about this. How much quicker did users find the information they needed? In example B to A, was it half as, twice as fast, or sorry, 1/2 as fast, twice as fast, 3 times as fast, 208 times faster? Spoiler alert, it's not 208 times. I'm curious to see what people say. Yeah, 3 times quicker. That was an easy one. Yeah, exactly. Not only did they find stuff 3 times quicker, this is the real beauty of this study is they actually they tested retention as well. They retention it around 75% better as well. So not only do people find what they want, what they need, they also remember it more. And this is it's cognitive science. We're not going to get into that today, but just trust me on this. So why does this make sense? Think about this on your phone. If you chunk these, even these are, I would say, the max amount of stuff you would put on an index card, right? These alone you'd have to scroll on your phone. So even these could probably go through the cut and cut more, and then the conversational approach kind of steps. But if you chunk them out, you'll at least give users the benefit of that scannability that we just talked about with the F-shaped pattern. All right, that was all about content development. Now let's talk about information architecture. So, mobile devices do a really great job of showing you your information architecture without even having to think about it. So how many of us have asked a decision maker a question like this before? And then, what is the one most important thing on this page for your site, right? This is the kind of stuff, we're just essentially saying, could you please help prioritize your things so we know where to put stuff? What goes in the hero of your homepage? I mean, these are the kind of questions. Any of us, let's see some chatter in the chat there. Now, I've asked this question many times, and I'm so surprised I used to get this response all the time. Stakeholders are like, prioritize. And at first I thought they were crazy, but then I realized what happened. Here, and this is the response I get. These 3 things are the single most important thing on the page. So when I get a response like that, then I go, right? We're just talking past each other. It's just kind of, it made no sense to me. And if you just take that at face value, if you don't further that investigation on that discovery with some conversation, you're going to end up with a design like this. So you can see this carousel style design. I don't know how this went down, but I can almost guess the conversation that happened here. An executive thought about this and said, you know what, Susan, the director of Explore type content, she'll be upset if her stuff's not on the homepage at the top, so that should go there and first. Yeah, the watch content, that's mostly Jim, that needs to go up there. The glass blowing thing, that's not that important. That's Joshua's area of expertise, and he's new, he just got promoted, so we'll put that down. Like, it's not at all what you think. So us as content creators, I think we commonly are like, why aren't you thinking of this like the users? There's all types of variables that go into decision making. So mobile first thinking forces content prioritization without people even knowing it. It's an extremely powerful tool. So instead of having that mind-blowing kind of conversation that's usually frustrating and ending with some kind of like carousel style thing at the top of your homepage. By the way, a side note on carousels will not pass, especially if they auto kind of advance, will not pass an accessibility audit. So if you don't, they're really bad for usability as well. The testing is true. For instance, about 1% of users that were observed using a carousel on a homepage that looks just like this. Only about 1% even clicked any of the slides. And out of that 1%, only 89% of those people, they all clicked the first one. So, in this Joshua on who's the executive of Make. So maybe Joshua's high-fiving that his stuff is on the homepage. No one's getting to that third slide, and certainly no one's clicking it. So think of it like this. What if you were to have that same conversation over again, replay that in your head, but you showed it to the executive like this with the items? You're no longer talking about prioritization. It has nothing to do with that. You're just saying, well, since we haven't talked about this on the desktop yet, right? I wouldn't even say that, right? You just say, this is going to work on a phone. And what we want to put the things that users are most likely to click on at the top. What do you think goes on the top? You see how that's a total flip of the script? It's a totally different conversation. And I found that stakeholders have no trouble answering that question, right? And guess what? You've just got them thinking from the user perspective. And that's the main goal here. If you display the information like this, like in a Word document or in a desktop kind of view or in a list, I guarantee you your stakeholders are thinking this, right? Without you even knowing it. And they're not thinking, I believe item 1 is the most important thing. They're thinking like what I said. Nancy is going to be really upset if she's not number 1 because, she's been here the longest time and she's the highest paid executive. Therefore, item 1 must exist. Joshua, item 6, that guy, Joshua, come on, get your stuff together. Now, here's another good thing. This works for all levels of information hierarchy. So I just use this as an example, but within item 1, there could be sub items. You can do this rinse and repeat time and time again. When you talk with stakeholders, when you talk with anyone that you need buy-in around this kind of stuff, this is a way to fast track that user-centered conversation. It works like a charm. And now the last thing I want to talk about is user interaction control selection. So what do I mean? I just mean like you are going to be forced as a designer, as a web creator, to pick the right kind of controls that we use. And you got to know all the rules. It took me a very, very long time. And I still want to look at patterns across the web because these things are always evolving. So you could do that. You could go back in time 16 plus years and get that kind of information, or you can use this tried and true mobile first design approach. So I'm going to show some examples here. This is an example of a website that did not use this approach. And I want to explain why. I think it's better to show than tell this. I want to explain why it's difficult for users. So here is the primary navigation. You can see some of these when I hover, open a menu. Now, the thing that's crazy here is when I click who we are, that is a page. There's a page called who we are with a bunch of content on it. But it's also on hover, it's a menu. So I can choose these. These are separate pages. No problem on the desktop. If this designer were to have done this on the mobile first, here's what they would have encountered. And by the way, how many of us have seen this in the real world? This is what we call a split button. This is actually it's called a split button because it looks like one, and it technically is a single button that does 2 different things. Just like hover and click did 2 different things, the same thing has to happen here. But guess what? On mobile, how does hover work? Exactly, it doesn't. Mobile first design. So what happens here is if you want to, you click this and it takes you to the who we are page. That content exists, right? If you want to access any of that information underneath there, you have to scroll all the way over, and this is a separate UI element altogether, and that opens up your choices. Now, user testing has proven time and time again that this kind of thing is very, very confusing to users. They don't know that you need to, and by the way, this is on a mobile, right? So imagine tapping your thumb on that little teeny hit target. I can almost guarantee you on this site, users never on the phone find this kind of information. So that's just kind of a small local company in my area. Let's look at this at scale. Nike.com, same exact issue. New releases on hover, it opens up this mega menu. Look at all these choices. But new releases is also a web page. Not only is it a web page, there's 1,524 things that they want to show. My assumption is this web page exists, therefore there's important information, just like on the other website. So let's see how this works on mobile. Shrink her down, use the hamburger menu. New releases, what do you expect to happen here? Is it going to work like the other one is? Oh, actually not, no. So this is not a split button. Well, that's good, right? Split buttons are bad. We know that having one UI element do two things is hard for users to understand. By the way, it's also not accessible. So you won't pass any accessibility audits with that kind of nonsense. But you come in here. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? There is no way in the mobile view to get to new releases page. So I guess they don't care about those 1,500 blah, blah, blah things on the new releases page. Why did Nike choose to not expose this information? You literally cannot get to that page. You can't click here. You can just go right. You can't even click there. You have to go all the way down to shoes, right? This is what I mean. So I show this example and people say, but Trevor, it's Nike. Like, how dare you? You know, like, blah, blah, blah. Sure. What I said in the beginning is, do you have a multi-million-dollar IT and web design team that has enough capacity, bandwidth, and budget to build two parallel systems? Maybe you do. If you don't, if you're not like Nike, then I highly encourage you to adopt kind of what I call and what we call it a flat navigation system, meaning because we designed it from the mobile first, it works the exact same across experiences. Remember, 91% of people are, or wait, 81%, geez, I said like everyone else voted. You got me saying the wrong thing now. 81% of people are going between, oh wait, no, I forget the stat now. It was 81% of people are on own cell phones, but there's like a high, it's like in the 90s, I think. It's a very high percentage of people are going in between, they're going in between multiple devices, right? So how does that work for a website that does this in the flat navigation style? This is a great example. This is Microsoft.com. As you can see, nothing's happening on hover. Here, when I hover, that opens the menu. Why is that good? Because try to hover on your cell phone. It doesn't exist, right? Now, do note that it does a nice little underline. I'll talk about this a little later, but as long as it's not critical information being hidden under a hover, something like this is a nice enhancement for desktop, right? But if they were, Microsoft designed this for the mobile first, so they knew that this enhancement would be nice. So anyway, you click and it opens your mega menu, right? You click to close, you click, you can mouse out, it doesn't close on you. Like look at the Nike one. If you hover and then hover out, you know, imagine that you have to, oops, see, I accidentally clicked. I didn't even mean to. Say I want to say for kids, right? I want to see boys' shoes. So I start to move my cursor, oh, right? Because it's all on hover. By the way, I've done, you know, thousands of hours of usability testing, and I see this happen all the time. In this, maybe someone expects hover in the very beginning, they realize it doesn't work, and they just use click. Now 100% of users know how to use this. You're designing for the edge cases, for those extreme kind of cases. Let's see how this works on a mobile device. Spoiler alert, it's the exact same. So you open this up, you can click this, guess what this does? Opens and closes the menu. Guess what happens when you click this little arrow? You see that it's in focus, that's what that dotted line is. It's the whole button. A single button is a single button. It does one thing. This is what we mean by flat navigation. And I guarantee you, users have an easier time going back and forth between this than on the Nike website. Now, not only is it easier for users, it's less code. So you like, I just don't understand this argument. Like, do you want to write two sets of code? Even though you know people are going between these different things, it's just a really great idea to adopt this kind of flat navigation pattern. I'm going to keep moving on here, but those are some really good examples. And I hope I convinced you by looking at how it fails on desktop, why mobile first just fast tracks these ideas. I don't know if Microsoft designed their website mobile first, but I do know if they were to have, they would have come to the same conclusions that we did just now. Now let's talk about some bigger UI things. This is a table. Tables are difficult. How does this work on a phone? I get this. That's like the meat and potatoes of this presentation is just ask yourself how to work on a phone, right? So what if you already have this design and you need to augment it for a phone? There's many ways to do it, but I love this example. This example actually takes away information. So the idea is you would click this and it would expose more information through progressive disclosure. This is what, I'll get into this a little later. How about this? Click a state to go to that state's page. Why use a map as navigation? I do not understand, right? Like there's no way you could fit all this on a phone, so everyone does something like this. Imagine this. Well, first of all, try to hit Rhode Island now with your cursor, even in the desktop view. Now try to hit Rhode Island, right? This is not accessible. It's not usable, and yet we get this kind of request all the time. You want to know on mobile if this were to have been designed mobile first, you want to know a much better solution? A simple list. This is accessible, it's usable, and people are used to seeing the states listed in alphabetical order. So I wanted to say mobile first isn't a buzzkill, okay? I get it. Maps are cool. This is way cooler than this, right? Not usable, but a lot cooler. So think of these, like I was talking about, as an enhancement for your large viewports. So if you have a little extra budget and you've done a mobile first design strategy first for step one, step two is then target those few places where you can make enhancements, right? Where? Could it be maybe it goes from a list to a map on the desktop? That's a great enhancement that many users may like. I would encourage you though, for accessibility purposes, even on the desktop, you should give that list. So there should be some way to toggle between the two. Same thing with tables, right? What a great enhancement when that large percentage of users are going between different devices to go from their phone and then see, oh, I can see all these things and compare at once on the desktop, as opposed to the other way around, right? So I want you to I want you to flip your brain on this. I want you to start thinking about mobile first design as guardrails around the highway of your designs. Okay, I'm stretching here, but you get the idea. You still have all this room to be creative, but try to stay within the confines of mobile first design. This is a way to fast track your designs to make sure they're usable and make sure they're accessible. Not only do you have all this room, you'll have this room too. And without even knowing it, you're doing usable and accessible design practices, user-centered design practices, simply by asking yourself that simple question, what would this look like on a phone? It couldn't be any easier. So here are the main takeaways. Mobile first encourages content development best practices. I want you to start thinking mobile first equals content first. Mobile first forces information architecture best practices. You have no choice but to put things in priority order when you're looking on a phone. Where there's a list, things can be prioritized, period, right? And how do you get through those tough conversations? Put it on a phone. Mobile first helps you select the best user interface controls. When in doubt, think of how it would work on the phone. Then you avoid things like the carousel that we talked about. You avoid things like split buttons. These are just known to be very, very difficult for users. So why even go back and learn all that information when you can just say, how would it work on a phone? And then if you find enhancements, back to that, the overstate here, that's a nice little enhancement. That gives mouse users on a desktop a nice little cue that this is clickable. And then the fourth thing, mobile first design gets you a long way with accessibility by default and usability. So this is the Ted Lasso effect. Without knowing anything about soccer, you can create a great soccer team. Without knowing the nuts and bolts of usability and accessibility, you can make usable and accessible products and websites simply by thinking about the phone first. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for participating. I hope you got something out of this one. I really like how targeted this was. I boiled the whole thing down into 4 main takeaways. I hope you can start using them today.